For almost a century, Pendle Hill has been a Quaker center welcoming all for spirit-led learning, retreat, and community. We invite friends into this community in many ways, including through our daily meeting for worship here in the barn and on Zoom, and through on-campus and online educational offerings, weaving together themes of faith and practice, prophetic witness, and creative exploration. Even in these deeply challenging times, we continue to celebrate and learn from the legacies of our spiritual ancestors, such as Bayard Rustin, and from one another. In honor of this moment, we are sharing publicly for the first time a 1-minute trailer of Pendle Hill's forthcoming podcast, The Seed, Conversations for Radical Hope.
Hey, 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 hey. Hey, hey, hey.
Welcome to Season 1 of The Seed, Conversations for Radical Hope, a podcast from Pendle Hill.
In the morning.
Exploring life with alternative lenses that reveals to us what is possible.
The purpose of this continual heartbreak is to reform our hearts.
To really heal people, we need to be treating both the immediate condition that they're suffering and also the underlying inflammation. I would say that the underlying inflammation in our society is hopelessness.
What is the natural world trying to tell us about ourselves?
Join me for Season 1 of The Seed, a podcast where Quakers and other seekers come together to explore visions of the world that is growing up through the cracks of our broken systems. I'm your host, Dwight Dunstan, a Quaker hip-hop artist and facilitator from West Philly. On this show, I'll be talking with community members of Pendle Hill, a Quaker center for spirit-led learning, about their activism and the moments of transformation that have expanded their visions of the world and of themselves. Join in the conversation by subscribing to The Seed anywhere you get your podcasts.
In the morning.
Friends may not have Hill Seed, and you'll find links to that trailer to hear more. The voice you heard was the voice of our host, Dwight Dunstan, who's joining us on Zoom right now. And he shared that he's going to be interviewing Quakers and other seekers, exploring visions of the world that's growing up between the cracks in our broken systems. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah. Many broken systems, sometimes including our audio systems. But we have a great faith that we will be able to bring forth a new world, and that's what Pendle Hill has always been here trying to do. The Seed Conversations for Radical Hope will launch on October 2nd in honor of World Quaker Day. And you can also sign up for Pendle Hill's newsletter for more information about this and all of our other offerings. Friends, at Pendle Hill, we believe one of the ways that we can heal the underlying inflammation of hopelessness in our society is by learning together. Thank you for being here tonight to make that possible. I will now invite Francisco Burgos, our Executive Director, to introduce our speaker for the evening.
Thank you, Francis. It's funny because, people say that time on television is very expensive, and there is a lot of things that we don't see. Well, this is not television, but we are mimicking something here. So bear with us, yeah? And in television, you also have some commercial, yeah? So I wanted just to highlight that beautiful project that Francis just mentioned, the seed, Pendle Hill podcast, Conversation for Radical Transformation, is made possible thank you for the generosity of the Shoemaker Fund. So, friends, we sometimes don't necessarily speak loud about how we support each other. And I don't want to make that mistake. Yeah. So, Sarah, before briefly introducing you, I would like to welcome everybody this evening to Pendle Hill, a place where we know that we can be and we can become, a place for radical transformation. And radical transformation, these are two silly words, because when you say radical, people say, oh my God, this is a lefty, yeah? And well, I won't go there because in this current environment, I don't know what a lefty is, yeah? But I just wanted to say that a place to be and become for 92 years, where people has found many ways to connect with themselves, with others, with the spirit, as they try to answer that of God. And we are here tonight to remind ourselves how essential is that we continue witnessing to what the transformative power of love can do. As people of hope, we strive to build a peaceful and just and a world where justice can bloom. And we do this by embracing our reality with integrity, courage, and simplicity. Stephen G. Cary was one of those friends that did not hesitate to answer that of God in his life. A man who deeply understood in his early life the intersectionality between faith, justice, peace, and action. Some of us has some problem playing with those elements, but for Steve, that was something that he learned very early on his life. And he also learned that participating in civil disobedience can be sometimes the most faithful way for following God's willing. We can highlight many of the contribution that Steve made to the Religious Society of France and to many Quaker institutions. But I only will say that tonight that for 60 years, Steve served the American Friends Service Committee. In the early years after the World War II, when Friends were helping to dream and to support the reconstruction of Europe. And after serving at AFSC, Steve, for 60 years, he came to Haverford College, where he was a key player in reimagining a Haverford College Quaker identity. We at Pendle Hill are so grateful for Steve Cary's testimony of peace, leadership, and teaching. And tonight, as we open the Stephen G. Cary Memorial Lecture, I want to express my deep gratitude on behalf of Pendle Hill to everyone that has trusted us in carrying our mission and for making this event a reality. A special gratitude to Norval and Anne Rees for partnering with us in early 2014 to establish this event as a special occasion to learn and reflect about how to continue discovering and advancing a spirit-led action in the work for peace and justice. Tonight, we will hear from friend Sarah Clarke, who serves as director of the Quaker United Nations office in New York. And Sarah leads keynote engagement with many constituencies within the UN and outside the UN system, bringing Quaker practice and values to the work of the United Nations. She will be sharing with us some insights about strategizing for change as we explore, or as she explored, the lessons from the life of Bayard Rustin and how they can be applied to the work of friends in the United Nations. So friends, we need to be faithful to some of our practice. So join me in a moment of silence as we welcome Sarah as Pendle Hill's fiscal year 23 Stephen G. Cary Lecturer. And for the friends that are online, you also can have that opportunity to worship with us for a brief moment. And Sarah will be speaking from us outside of silence. And if you are curious, you can also read Steve Cary many essays that were published in early 2015 by Pendle Hill and in partnership with many other Quaker organizations, including FGC, AFSC, Germantown Friends, and many, many, many others. Thank you.
Good evening, friends. My name is Sarah Clarke, as Francisco has mentioned, and I'm a member of Ottawa Monthly Meeting in Canada. Ottawa Meeting sits on the traditional lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. And I have lived in Ottawa until I was in my early 20s. Since my early 20s, I have spent much of my adult life living first off in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar or Burma, Thailand, and Cambodia. And I've also lived a good chunk of my adult life in the United States, including 14 years in New York City. Currently, I live in Philadelphia, though I spend a good amount of my week in New York as well. I live here with my spouse, Kirk Smothers, who's here tonight. I'm really glad that he can be here. And we have a teenager who attends Abington Friends School. I want to begin by thanking Pendle Hill for the invitation to speak tonight, which is a great honor. I want to recognize all the hard work and coordination that went into making this hybrid event possible. It's been really exciting to have the chance to get back together and spend time in person while simultaneously also connecting with friends online. But we should not underestimate the amount of careful planning and coordination that is required for this new kind of hybrid model to work. I also want to thank Walter Nagel, who is the partner of Bayard Rustin and who took time to talk with me as I prepared for tonight's session. And finally, I want to express deep thanks for my colleague, Raquel Saraswati, who serves as the Senior Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the American Friends Service Committee. Raquel provided me with support as I prepared for this evening and really pushed me to grapple with some important challenges. In November 2021, I was appointed director at the Quaker United Nations office in New York. The months since then have been a wonderful homecoming, as I previously served as one of the Quaker representatives to the UN from 2002 until 2014. Some of you I know from that period of my life. For others, I'm meeting you, I've met you more recently, or tonight I'm meeting you for the first time. I'm deeply humbled that you have chosen to spend this time together. Having worked for the American Friends Service Committee in the past, I was familiar with Stephen Cary's name. I was really glad, though, to receive the book about Stephen's life as I set about preparing for tonight. If you haven't already read the memoir, it is a wonderful view into a fascinating life and many achievements of a man who truly let his life speak. If you have read the book, you will know that Bayard Rustin makes a cameo appearance. While we celebrate and honor the accomplishments of Stephen Cary, our Quaker community has done less to hold up and celebrate the lives of those in our community who are people of color. This manifests itself in a number of different ways. For one thing, Quakers have been slow to engage in frank conversations about the role that members of our community played around slavery in this country. While we are quick to point out that certain friends who are remembered for their role in abolition, we have done less to reflect on the painfully slow process that was needed for the Religious Society of Friends to come together in unity in opposition to slavery. In order to be a community that offers a sense of belonging to all, including friends of African descent, we need to be open to undertake this difficult conversation together. Also, today, here in North America, we often are oblivious to the fact that the largest communities of Quakers in the world live in Africa. Friends World Committee for Consultation estimates Kenya yearly meeting to have approximately 120,000 friends in membership. This is far larger than the number in membership here in the United States, which is estimated to be at about approximately 76,000. The Quaker community in Kenya comprises individuals who have served as leaders in parliament, and they've been posted as ambassadors. But here in North America, most of us are oblivious to the accomplishments of our Kenyan brothers and sisters. I've worked with Quaker service agencies since the late 1990s, and I'm deeply grateful that today, in 2022, I can look around and see leaders and mentors who are people of color. These include my counterpart, Nazizwe Madlala Rutledge, who serves as the director of the Quaker UN office in New York, as well as Joyce Ajluni, who serves as general secretary at the American Friends Service Committee. That said, as a faith community with members in all parts of the globe, we have much more work to do in order to hold up and celebrate the members of our community, past and present, who are people of color. This thought was on the back of my mind as I read Stephen Cary's memoir. And from what I know of Steve through reading about his life, I think he would have agreed with me. In fact, I credit Steve's story about Bayard Rustin as a message that was sent, that really set me on a track for tonight's discussion. I want to acknowledge my own positionality in undertaking this project, and that I have come to it as somebody with tremendous privilege. I am a straight, economically secure woman of European descent who's had access to higher education and the opportunity to travel and meet people from around the world. The career that I've had and the life that I have led have been facilitated by the privilege that I was born into. Also, I want to acknowledge that there are important efforts being made within the Religious Society of Friends to celebrate the lives of Quakers of color. One initiative that comes to mind is the Black Quaker Project, created by friend Hal Weaver. I encourage friends to seek out and take advantage of such resources as we all work to lift up the diversity within our community. Shining a light on these stories is not a task solely for people of color. White Quakers also share in the responsibility to honor and celebrate the diverse leaders in our community. Tonight, I want to hold up the linkages and commonalities between Bayard Rustin's work and the work that we do at the Quaker UN office. At the same time, it's important that to note that there are differences between the approach that Bayard took and the work that we do at the UN. Friend Bayard used and developed tools of direct action and mass mobilization. In fact, the achievements for which he is probably best known include his support to Dr. Martin Luther King during the Montgomery bus boycott, and as the architect of the 1963 March on Washington. This is not the kind of work that our office does at the UN. In learning about Bayard's life, there are wonderful stories of instances where he led marches in front of UN buildings in New York. So while Bayard's work focused on engaging and mobilizing people outside the UN, our work is focused on engagement inside the UN buildings. That said, many important linkages do exist. To highlight these commonalities, let's just pause and think about the world into which both Bayard and the UN were born. Bayard Rustin was born March 17th, 1912 in Westchester, Pennsylvania, not that far from where we are tonight. Raised by his Quaker grandmother, Bayard graduated high school and went on to undertake several years of college during the early 1930s. At the same time, in Europe, the League of Nations, which had been formed after the First World War, was struggling to preserve peace and security in Europe. Punishments meted out by the Treaty of Versailles, combined with the impact of a worldwide economic depression, saw the emergence of fascism and instability in Central Europe. As a peace church with a long history and commitment to nonviolence, Quakers took a deep interest in the League of Nations. Quakers were posted in Geneva to represent the Religious Society of Friends at the League of Nations, as that earlier experiment in multilateralism struggled to get through the 1920s and the 1930s. While the situation in Europe deteriorated, Bayard Rustin came to live in Harlem in New York City. This was also a time when Bayard became connected with peace organizations such as the American Friends Service Committee and the Fellowship of Reconciliation. So while the world hurtled towards another world war, Bayard immersed himself in pacifism and nonviolence. As a result of his commitment, he would spend 3 years in prison between 1944 and 1946. The United Nations was formed in 1947, a year after Bayard's release from prison. Emerging in the wake of terrible devastation caused by the Second World War, countries came together to form an international body with the aim of preventing future global catastrophes. Also in 1947, Quakers applied for accreditation at the UN and began working at the UN in New York the following year. There are Quaker offices in New York and in Geneva. Both offices represent the worldwide community of friends on behalf of and under the auspices of Friends World Committee for Consultation. In addition to our relationship with FWCC, the American Friends Service Committee, or AFSC, serves as our other partner organization for our office in New York. Priorities for our work at the UN are set by a committee that is made up of representatives jointly appointed by FWCC and AFSC. In New York, we work in close partnership with UN diplomats and officials to increase the global commitment to the UN's role as a promoter of lasting peace. We believe that the UN will only fulfill this aspect of its mandate when its peace initiatives truly respond to the community needs. And we seek to build bridges between the UN in New York and voices and perspectives from the ground. Whether in New York or in Geneva, Quakers working at the UN have long believed that providing quiet spaces away from formal UN meeting rooms will allow important and constructive conversations to take place. In our work, we use Quaker House as a setting where we can bring a diversity of concerns, views, and perspectives before UN decision makers. This allows UN officials and diplomats to receive information that they might not otherwise be able to access, and to work together to forge new and creative solutions. To learn more about QNO, and I'm also going to replicate Francisco's approach of adding the commercial upload for everybody, I encourage you all to visit our website at quno.org. In particular, I encourage you to sign up and receive our regular newsletters, which will keep you up to date with the work that we do in both New York and Geneva. As I've mentioned, our approach of working quietly inside the UN stands in contrast to the type of work that is often associated with Bayard Rustin. Friend Bayard advocated for people to practice social dislocation and to use nonviolent disobedience to challenge authority. It is, however, in the commitment to nonviolence and pacifism where our work at the UN connects with the life and work of Bayard Rustin. From the 1940s onwards, Bayard studied the philosophy of nonviolence and played a pivotal role bringing these methods to the United States. While Dr. King is widely seen as a leader who integrated nonviolence into the civil rights movement, it was Bayard Rustin who pushed Dr. King to fully embrace the approach. Likewise, in our work at the UN in New York, our ultimate aim is to consistently push and challenge international policymakers to find nonviolent solutions, recognizing, as Dr. King said, that violence begets violence. We must meet the forces of hate with the power of love. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. To give a little more of a flavor of our work in New York, I want to share a story from my own experience having worked at QNO in the past. And the meeting I'm thinking of really stands out in my mind because yesterday marked the 21st anniversary of the September 11th attacks. We grieve the loss of life that occurred on that day, and we also grieve the disastrous policies and actions that were then set in motion by the US government and others that produced many, many thousands of deaths in Afghanistan, Iraq, and elsewhere. In the period after September 11th, the US responded with fear and retribution, launching a war on terror and insisting that we do not engage with terrorists. In the wake of these events, the question of how and whether to engage with armed groups became a very sensitive one at the UN. During this period, CUNO hosted a small briefing at Quaker House on the topic of engagement with armed groups. For CUNO, this theme has been an important one as it connects with and is certainly informed by our Quaker belief that there is that of God or the divine within everyone. This has shaped our interest and support for mediation efforts and the idea that peace is best brought about by dialogue and seeking mutual understanding, not isolation and punishment. For the meeting, we brought together two experts, together with a small group of diplomats. The experts had been involved in peace talks, one in Northern Ireland and the other in a peace process that had taken place in Lebanon. The meeting was intended to then provide a space where our guests could share their insights and lessons learned with diplomats from a variety of countries in Southeast Asia. We started the meeting by emphasizing that our guests had come to a safe space where they could speak openly and share a frank exchange of ideas. The meeting was small, which allowed diplomats to engage actively and ask the visiting experts challenging questions on sensitive topics. For instance, how to build connections with moderate leaders and how to support armed actors to transform their struggle into political movements or political parties. We also discussed the need to avoid using pejorative language. And on this topic, one of the diplomats who was with us shared their own experience of observing a mediation process where a government leader stopped referring to the other side as terrorists and instead began calling them my brothers in the jungle. The diplomat noted that this shift had a transformative effect on the ability of the government and the armed forces or the armed group to undertake constructive conversations. While the meeting started out as a formal briefing, over the course of the discussion, the diplomats relaxed and began to openly talk about opportunities and challenges facing their own countries. The discussion spilled well over its scheduled time slot and finally ended as our guests left, expressing deep thanks for the unique opportunity to talk about some very difficult issues. This is just one example from many, and I hope it gives a sense of what our work looks like in action. While Bayard Rustin brought the philosophy of nonviolence into the US civil rights movement in the 1960s, this is one example of how Quakers continue to weave our commitment to nonviolence into engagement with members of the UN community. Another key aspect of Bayard Rustin's strategies for change was his focus on ordinary people. Bayard believed that ordinary people could make a big difference. As friend George Lakey said in a recent article, Bayard always urged organizers to pay close attention when the people are in motion. In Quaker work at the UN in New York, we believe that UN officials and diplomats must be informed by the perspectives and wisdom coming from outside the UN world. We face a challenge in this work because the UN is an institution formed by governments, which means that it is often dominated by the perspectives of elites. In New York, our role has often been to lift up the voices that otherwise go unheard. Another important linkage between the approach embraced by Bayard Rustin throughout his life and the approach that underpins Quaker work at the UN is our common focus on internationalism. Internationalism refers to the belief that people should seek out opportunities to cooperate, coordinate, and unite across international boundaries. It can be contrasted to nationalism, which promotes the interests of a particular country and the importance of building a single strong national identity. Bayard Rustin first traveled outside the US in 1948, visiting India. In the early 1950s, Bayard traveled to Africa. These trips allowed him to build direct relationships with important independence leaders in the global South, including Prime Minister Nehru of India and President Nkrumah in Ghana. And while Bayard is frequently associated with the civil rights efforts focused on racial equality in the US, he was also deeply engaged around international disarmament efforts. Towards the end of the 1950s, while working with the Committee for Nonviolent Action, he was an active leader in the anti-nuclear movement, leading marches in the UK and Germany. In 1959, he took part in the Sahara Project, a campaign that brought together Bayard's passion around nuclear disarmament and the struggle for freedom and self-determination in Africa. Later in life, Bayard would renew his engagement on international issues, focusing on the spread of democracy and the provision of humanitarian assistance. In particular, he carried out advocacy on behalf of refugees fleeing the upheavals in Vietnam and Cambodia. Likewise, the mandate of the Quaker UN offices embraces this same commitment to internationalism. In Geneva, Quaker representatives focus on issues related to peace and disarmament, the human rights of migrants, sustainable and just economics, and the human impacts of climate change. In New York, where we focus on expanding the number of diplomats and UN officials who are committed to peaceful solutions, we engage around the vital issues of youth inclusion in peacebuilding, the question of how peacebuilding can inform responses to conflict. And we work with UN counterparts as they take up the recent proposal by the UN Secretary General to launch a new agenda for peace. Underpinning all this work is a belief shared with friend Bayard in the importance of connecting with and supporting those from around the world without fear or labeling others as outsiders. Indeed, from what I know of Bayard Rustin's life, I'm able to see many instances when he embraced the invitation of George Fox, as we do today, to walk cheerfully over the earth, answering that of God in everyone. During the coming year, CUNO will celebrate its 75th anniversary. This will be an opportunity to reflect on achievements from the past, examine the lessons we can learn from leaders such as Bayard Rustin, and look towards the future. As part of our anniversary celebration, we are reinvigorating our connections with Quaker communities. You can all be a part of this effort by signing up to receive our regular emails. Again, the website is quno.org. Also, be sure to stay tuned for more information regarding an anniversary celebration that we will be holding in New York City in June 2023. And please contact our office if your meeting would like to host a member of our staff as a speaker. I want to conclude this reflection by holding up one other significant lesson that we can learn from the life of Bayard Rustin. And this is the importance of embracing diversity and building communities in which everyone enjoys a sense of belonging. As many of you will know, Bayard Rustin was an openly gay man during a period when the rights of the LGBTQ community were severely restricted in the United States. Despite his brilliance as an organizer and a strategist, friend Bayard found himself repeatedly pushed to the margins. His pragmatic approach led him to carefully weigh any potential damage that his personal life could bring to the movement, leading him to play a pivotal role, but usually from the background. Also, there were a number of moments when the organizations and movements with which he worked painfully discarded and distanced themselves from him. These breaks would emerge out of a fear of Bayard Rustin's association with the Communist Party early on in his career, his reputation as a conscientious objector, and his sexual identity. Painful breaks also emerged in the second half of the 1960s as issues related to economic justice took greater prominence in his work. Bayard's essay, From Protest to Politics, captured the priorities that he saw around building coalitions and working with moderates. But this pragmatic direction in his work provoked condemnation by some on the radical left. What was surely a painful experience for Bayard was also a loss for the communities and movements with which he worked. There is no denying that Bayard Rustin was a master of strategy and tactics. But when movements for social change turn inwards and attack members of our own communities because they don't live up to an imposed litmus test, we lose important gifts. Rather than embracing and learning from the diversity of views and perspectives in our midst, we sometimes push and punish individuals and force them to stay on the margin. Let us learn from the life of Bayard Rustin, not just from his talents and the skills that were used and recognized, his focus on nonviolence, his commitment to holding up the voices of ordinary people, and his ability to build linkages across international boundaries. But let us challenge ourselves to make sure that we're able to embrace a diversity of views, voices, and perspectives so that all are included and enjoy a sense of belonging in our communities as we seek to build God's kingdom on earth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for sharing that with us. I'm very moved to hear you in conversation with last year's Cary lecture, which was given by Vanessa July, who's sitting with us here in the barn. We were able to publish a pamphlet in August with the text of her lecture, Radical Transformation Long Overdue for the Religious Society of Friends. And I really hear her words speaking to what you shared today. I'm really grateful to look forward to publishing the words that you've shared with us. And now I think is my favorite part is to invite all of you into this conversation as well. This is the moment where we get to hear the questions that have come alive for you listening to Sarah and invite her into conversation with the folks in the room and also on Zoom. So this is, as always, Pendle Hill is an ongoing experiment in spiritual learning community. And our experiment today involves Zoom and on campus talking to each other. So we're grateful for your patience in the choreography this is going to involve. But we will invite a question from the room. Lena will bring the microphone to anyone who has a question. Then I will be on my phone, not ignoring all of you, but actually getting questions that people on Zoom are being invited to send to the tech host. And I will ask a question to Sarah, and we'll alternate questions from the room and questions from Zoom. So I invite everyone to take a moment to reflect on the wisdom that Sarah has shared with us and invite your questions into this room.
Sarah, you mentioned Bayard presence within the Religious Society of Friends and the the close relationship that he has with many of our institutions, including AFSC. And I am departing from what Francis was just sharing, you know, you and Vanessa recognize that there are so many tasks that we as a religious society need to continue embracing to really, really, really welcome diversity in the best way as possible, and really honoring the legacy of the people of color as Bayard, yeah, and being true to ourselves in recognizing that we have done stuff that distance us from recognizing that of God in our friends that are different from a European descendant. So when we taking that as a background, is there any things that you would like to share with us about Bayard's own experience on how he was navigating those situations within our Quaker institutions?
Thanks, Francisco. First off, I'm going to start with a disclaimer of saying that I am not a deep authority on Bayard Rustin, and I'm very aware of it because I know that there are other people in this room who knew Bayard Rustin and who will know a lot more. And there are people online who I know a lot more about Bayard Rustin than I did. I mean, from what I have what I've read, I mean, I think that Bayard Rustin had a number of different identities, and it's interesting. I mean, the different examples that I read seem to indicate to me that in terms of his racial identity, actually, that was a place where Quaker institutions and service agencies were institutions that welcomed him and welcomed other people of color and saw him as a partner and a strategist and gave and made space and for his leadership role. So my sense is that that is a place where that in terms of his racial identity, actually that Quaker institutions were quite welcoming and proud of this member of their community. From what I've read, it's really was more that his sexual identity posed a greater challenge towards Quaker first at that time in the 1960s for Quaker within the Quaker community. So those are the places where I've seen instances where there actually were moments where, for instance, in AFSC at the time, after an arrest that took place in California, where AFSC was in a position of actually actively distancing themselves. That was an experience with a Quaker institution. That was also an experience that very much came up within the Southern conflict, sorry, I'm going to get all of my acronyms mixed up, but within, I mean, in the relationship with working with Dr. King and Southern pastors, that was actually also very much a feeling of putting up walls because of his sexual identity. But I would also turn to others who are with us who may have thoughts and insights about that experience with the Quaker community.
I didn't ask these questions to point fingers in Quaker institution, but more focus on the lessons that, because I think that, you know, as in my own position as executive director of Pendle Hill, I think that there are so many things that we still need to learn in order to embrace the Quaker values and the welcoming and the diversity. And I think this is true for all of us.
That's right. And it may not be around, I mean, we can see how there are issues around racial identity, where we have to learn to grow and expand and embrace. There are issues around gender identity, sexual identity, but there are all sorts of, I mean, I think one of the things that I have really appreciated, I guess I'm speaking as a parent of a teenager. One of the things that's been so delightful in seeing the world through my child's eyes are the ways in which when I grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there was a very what I regard now as incredibly overly simplistic ideas of identity, and that you're either this or you're that, and then you're this, and you sort of check off the boxes. And what I really love in one of those moments where my child has opened up my eyes to something new is that actually it's not that simple at all. It's a whole area. There's so many different things, and there's no need to try and classify them, these different identities, or organize them. It's so much richer when we just accept others in our community without needing to classify or order them, put them into boxes. So.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question that we heard online echoed exactly what Francisco was asking. So another beautiful resonance. Another friend online asks if you could speak to Bayard's role in writing AFSC's Speak Truth to Power.
Here I'm going to have to say that I really can't, other than I do know that he was involved in the project, but I am not enough of a Bayard Rustin scholar to be able to provide details. I would love it if anybody here with deeper knowledge and background on AFSC historical documents would have any insights on that.
One of the things that I heard, do we have someone? Would you like to speak to that? Wonderful.
I understand this, that he was like the pivotal person in writing that. And, but he refused to put his name on it because it might bring some controversy to AFSC, but he was central. His magnificent intelligence and ability to bring things together was pivotal for that document.
I talked with Stephen Cary himself, who was the secretary to that working party that produced that, and about that account. And he said it's exactly right. That is that Bayard came down the last morning of the gathering when it had finalized its work and said, it just doesn't make sense for my name to be on it, because that will become the issue. People won't look at the work we did, they'll be talking about me, and that distracts. So let's not have my name there. And there were members of the working party who said, no, Bayard, you were so important, and so on and so on. And he said, no, I know, I can predict what would happen, so let's leave my name off. So thank goodness AFSC now has his name on.
Hello, My name is Nana Sante, and I'm a freshman at Swarthmore. So we've talked a bit about racial diversity, but I also want to talk a bit about age diversity. As I'm looking around the room, I can see that I'm the youngest here by many decades. As a Christian, I'm quite aware of the trend for young people, my demographic, to not take up a faith-based religion. I was wondering what Quakers or the Quaker community was doing to attract the younger demographic to them.
Of our continuing revolution program, which is a program for young adults. It's a play on words of the Quaker belief in continuing revelation. And it's been a space that's been really special for me to come together with folks who either identify as Quaker or otherwise are just seeking spiritual questions and want a community of young people to come together and do that. That being said, I didn't know anything about Quakers as a young person until I was at Bryn Mawr College and got involved in an intergenerational effort of organizing called the Earth Quaker Action Team. And that's been a joyful space for me because it's a mixture of both young people and folks of all ages and folks like George who've been in the work for decades. So I will say there are some Quaker spaces where I walk in and everyone immediately notices that I'm a young person and afterwards will ask me to join 3 committees, and that usually doesn't work very well to persuade me to want to hang out. But when I get to come into spaces where meaningful work and questions are being grappled with, that has been the thing that's hooked me into Quaker community. And I feel really lucky that my introduction to Quaker spaces was through meaningful work and grappling with meaningful questions. So that's my plug for the Earth Quaker Action Team and my plug for Continuing Revolution here at Pendle Hill, which happens in June every year.
I'm going to predict that Laura also has some great examples to share.
Hi, I'm Laura Boyson with AFSC. And as we're giving plugs for different things, I also want to say that AFSC has just started a program called the Emerging Leaders for Liberation. And that is a program that we have launched where we are trying to engage Quaker youth, young people, and people who we call Quaker adjacent. I don't know if that's a thing, but people who may be attending Quaker institutions, but not themselves Quaker. But also those folks who are interested in social justice and building their ability to be active in those spaces, and also bringing them together with other folks who are directly impacted young people who are active in their own communities and also want to build their skills and their ability to be leaders in their own communities, and bringing them together over the course of several months so they can learn from each other. They can learn from folks who are active already. AFSC has many people across the country and around the world who are just the kind of people that they would want to talk to, who've been doing this work for years, and bringing them together so that they can build their ability and network with each other as well, so that beyond there, they can be able to work together and then go back into their own communities and use the skills that they have been developing back in their own communities, and hopefully will maintain a network with each other so they can continue to grow. Because AFSC itself was founded by young people. It was not founded by people who look like many of the folks here, and myself included, right? It was founded by young people. So making sure that we are always being connected, young people, intergenerational work, I think is really important. And I think we're so glad to have you here today and glad that you decided to join us.
So I I may hear about this when we get home. But I appreciate that when you were talking about Bayard's model and what he showed us. It's not all the same of what you do at CUNO and the way you approach the work. And, Quakers have a long history, and Francisco used this word early on, of radicalism, right? We feel strongly about things related to our testimonies, and we like to see change happen. And so oftentimes that manifests itself by going and marching on the street, or writing letters, or trying to be persuasive. But how do you reconcile that kind of radical tradition of Quakers in an office that has to work within the system at the UN?
Always giving me grief, but we kind of, again, here's another example of thinking about things in categories, right? And assuming that one thing is on the other side, one thing is over here and the other thing is over here, and never the twain shall meet. I'm often, so there is that tradition within the Religious Society of Friends. Speak truth to power, stand up, be direct, allow the spirit to work through me as an individual to work towards change. There's also a tradition, or a really strong value and focus within Quakerism on listening and being open to receiving wisdom from different sources. And this is one thing that's always struck me about when working at the UN, is that there is a way in which the UN itself operates like a Quaker meeting, and that there is that aspect of governments, different member states coming together with their issues, whatever their positions are. But the real magic of the UN is the place where actually, because you have people from different places with completely different perspectives, working on something together over a period of time, that there is the ability for transformational relationships and listening, and for that ability that the people who do this work, diplomats, they're human beings, just like we are when we come into a Quaker meeting. And we may come into a Quaker meeting with a great sense of clarity of what our view is on a particular issue, or where we have a burning passion or desire. And through the experience of Quaker meeting, we can be transformed and move. I'm not saying that you're necessarily swinging to a completely different place, but your view and your outlook can be enriched and shifted and changed. And at its heart, that's actually what diplomacy is about. Diplomacy is about the ability of diplomats to come together and actually be human beings together, not just to be very formal representatives for their governments, but to actually be human beings. And the most of the work of diplomacy happens over a cup of coffee. It's not necessarily those moments where formal statements are being read at the Security Council or in the General Assembly. It's the moment where a group of perhaps 5 diplomats who have worked together over a period of months around a process to move a resolution forward have gotten to know each other and have actually, and know things like they know about each other's kids. They recognize the ways that despite the fact that they come from very different countries and have very different experiences, and their governments have given them very different instructions, there is an underlying commonality that connects them. And I think it is that in the same way that when we come together in meeting, that we can find those connections and new things can emerge and transformation can happen. And certainly that's very much our intention of the work that we do, and the space of using, for instance, Quaker House as a place where diplomats can get away from that very formal type of interaction to actually be together as human beings.
There's a request online for those using this mic to speak loudly and close to the mic. So thank you for that invitation. There's a question online that's a good follow-up to this idea of the UN and its parallels to the Quaker meeting. I'm going to try to do it justice. Oh, farther from the mic. Is this better? How's this? Great. Awesome. Real-time feedback. Okay, so the question is about the role that CUNO can play providing quiet space in diplomacy where theological bases of countries' actions exist. If there's any particular role that you see CUNO playing when there are underlying theological foundations of the state actors' actions.
The first thing that comes to my mind is some work that CUNO did a good number of years ago that I remember, work that we did very closely with the Mennonite Central Committee in looking at promoting dialogue between, at that time, it was really dialogue between American and American Friends Service Committee was closely involved in this work, but looking at finding ways to support and strengthen opportunities for dialogue between the United States and Iran. And so there was a component of the work that was, I mean, it was very much focused on the domestic, the foreign policy of two countries, Iran and the United States. But and it just happened that because New York and the United Nations is because of the restrictions on representation of countries, mainly Iran and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea. Those two countries, I think those are the two countries that are restricted in their, they don't have diplomatic representation in Washington. So the only place where you will find diplomatic representation of those countries is in New York at the UN. So the UN became a place where the possibility of actually exploring the possibility of bridging some of those divides was possible. And actually the way it was framed, and we did this work very closely with the Mennonite Central Committee, was looking at the commonalities between Islam and Christianity, and really looking at the commonalities between monotheistic religions and recognizing that our religious traditions, while they had shaped, while the political discourse in the two countries were very different, there were actually aspects of their religious tradition that they shared in common. And it was particularly the focus on monotheism. And it's interesting. I mean, I guess I would kind of wonder about the question about religious, theological differences. I guess my own thinking about it is, and I say this as somebody who has spent a lot of time, I mean, my work has focused a lot on Southeast Asia and a lot on Myanmar, Burma. And if you're familiar with that country, you'll know that Buddhism plays a very important role politically in that country and has become very tied up in conflict issues in that country. I would not say that there is anything inherent in Buddhism that has produced a situation where there has really been a rise in what we might describe as xenophobia within that country, a concern about the perception of outsiders who do not conform to who are not Buddhist. I would say that that's a political manipulation of religion for political purposes. And I guess I would also think about that in terms of the conflict between the US and Iran as well, that there's actually plenty between Islam and Christianity that we share in common, but the differences aren't so much about the theology, it's about how political leaders use those religious, different religious labelings and categorization to create divisions for political purposes. So I guess in that way, I would say that actually the UN is a really important place to try and get beyond those types of barriers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So one of the things I've always loved about Quakerism is that because of its decentralized structure, like local concerns at a local meeting can be different from another meeting. I'm not saying there aren't commonalities and concerns, but thinking about the way in which you uplift ordinary voices, I'm interested to know what mechanisms you have organizationally to actually hear ordinary voices. And yeah, I'm just kind of, it seems like there might be a clash between the internationalism and the kind of on the ground ordinary voices. And I'm just kind of curious, thinking in the tradition of Bayard Rustin, how organizationally you do that. Thank you.
No, I don't see a clash at all. I see that this is actually the work. This is the making the connections between those people at the community level. And maybe I want to distinguish between two different kinds of linkages at the community level and maybe to respond on those two different sides. First off, as the representative office of the worldwide community of friends, we need to have, we are there to represent the diversity, the huge wide world of Quakers in all of its wonderful diversity, and the way in which concerns of friends in Australia is going to be different from us friends in Bolivia, and is different from friends in Estonia or here in the United States or in Canada. So in terms of the way that we connect with those communities, that's where our connection with the Friends World Committee for Consultation is really crucial, because then our governance structure includes representatives from each of the sections around the 4 sections of FWCC have representatives who sit on our committee, which is our governing board. And their role is to be in touch with the communities in their sections and to be able to raise up, and so that we sitting in New York or our friends, our colleagues in Geneva it provides a mechanism that we can connect with friends around the world. So that is one level of connecting with communities. And it is then those people on the committee, and I'm looking around the room, for instance, Gretchen has been one of our committee members in the past. And that committee is actually the group that sets our strategic directions and helps and works with staff to understand where we're going to focus our work at the UN, and to do so in a way that reflects the concerns that are coming up through the sections. Then the other kind of connecting with communities that we do is when we have identified an area of work, that's when it's really important. That's when we do the bridging between the community level and the UN. And there we may have Quaker communities that we can connect to. For instance, in New York, we have had a history of working on issues related to Burundi. And there is a Quaker community in Burundi. So it's been very important to have connections with the Quaker community in Burundi. But we also connect with Quaker service agencies. And so that's where, and in particular, for instance, we connect with the American Friends Service Committee. I know I've been involved in work that has connected, for instance, with the work of the American Friends Service Committee, work on the ground that AFSC is carrying out in Somalia. Or I know that one of my colleagues has just done meetings with AFSC offices in Guatemala. And these are opportunities then where, because AFSC will then have a linkage to community members in those countries. And it'll be very important then where if we're working with a UN official, say on the case of Somalia, that to be able to, I know I can think of times where it was very important to work with AFSC partners and to be able to bring the views of the AFSC partners and to share those with UN officials who were developing policy work in response to the conflict situation in Somalia. And those are kinds of linkages that don't happen because actors at the UN don't have the mandate to go out and link with civil society organizations or the kinds of partners that AFSC will have identified, or that other Quaker service agencies can help us connect with. So there's sort of two different levels of working and connecting with community, and it actually is definitely because. Yes, exactly. The UN, because it is a club of governments and member states, it does not have the capacity or doesn't have the muscles that it can flex to connect with those perspectives and those insights and those views. And so that's where we really focus on playing that bridging role to lift those voices up.
So that beautifully answered half of a question that we received online about how CUNO intersects with the work of other Quaker agencies. The other half of the question is if you could speak a bit about CUNO's strategic priorities today.
So CUNO New York, and I'm really speaking about CUNO New York's work because the two offices, we shape our priorities differently. But in New York, we have recently been through a strategic planning process, which has been this wonderful, wonderful process of really both focusing and gaining clarity on the core areas where we want to focus. And that's really is, as I mentioned, the desire that our role and our purpose in New York is to expand that support for nonviolent and peaceful solutions and the UN's role in bringing those around, and recognizing that those peaceful solutions have to be solutions that are based on the insights and the learnings from community, so that all of our work is focused on that. In order to work towards that objective, there are certain entry points and certain places where we engage. So at the moment, those are the main places where we have been focusing, are particularly looking at UN work around youth, peace, and security. So looking at how young people can be seen as important leaders in peace building rather than as threats that need to be contained. Another area that we're looking at is how the UN, which is increasingly faced with a variety of different crises. Some of them are humanitarian crises, others are crises that perhaps are brought around because as a result of climate change. That how then in responding to crisis, how can really short-term crisis interventions be informed by the learning of longer-term peace-building approaches? So how can those short-term humanitarian type interventions actually lay the groundwork for longer lasting and sustainable peace? We've also been doing some works focused on the report of the Secretary General that came out a year ago entitled Our Common Agenda. And one particular part of that report issued a proposal, a call to UN member states to launch a new agenda for peace. The language was very vague about what that meant or what that looked like. And so our staff has been working closely with diplomats and with UN officials to try and say, well, if we were going to have a new agenda for peace, what would that actually mean? What would that look like? So that's been one thing that we've been working on. We're also at the moment, and this is a work that falls on my plate, but often ends up being neglected because of my own background and expertise on Myanmar or Burma. We are looking at how to work with the UN and particularly member states within the UN who are from Southeast Asia, to look at their role in supporting and bringing about a peaceful solution to the conflict that has gone on in that country for many, many decades. So those are a range of a few different areas that we're looking at. But again, those are all what we call entry points, and that they're all a collection of different places that we can engage with UN actors with the larger goal of really strengthening the UN's role in bringing around peace that is long lasting and that is focused on the needs of people.
Thank you. As we near the end of our time together tonight, there's one last invitation from online. If you could close with some reflections of how you personally have been inspired by Bayard Rustin and where spirit has felt alive for you learning from his life in preparation for tonight.
I think what I would draw on is, and I certainly came out also in reading the memoirs of Steve Cary as well. And that is the full and total commitment around finding nonviolent solutions. And this has been an issue that's really been on my mind over the past months in work, particularly as somebody who works at the UN, and we grapple with response around the current conflict and crisis in Ukraine, and seeing a situation where where people's lives can be upturned, and we can feel a sense of great injustice. And I also see how quickly we as a society, and when we read the media, how quickly we slip into and assume a narrative around the idea that the only solution will be to find a military solution to the conflict. And certainly I've been thinking about this in the last few days as we've seen media coverage about latest developments, and sort of a sense of there's kind of a David and Goliath kind of narrative going on right now about, you know, how could this small little country manage to have this offensive and have it successfully take place. And of course, there's a reason why it can successfully, well, I'm not going to, I apologize. I do not want to oversimplify it, but certainly a transfer of an enormous amount of weapons is one of the ways in which that kind of an offense can be quote unquote successful. At the same time, there's very little space to understand the consequences of pursuing that kind of a solution. And this is one of the things that, you know, that we grapple with at the UN. The UN doesn't have the capacity to enforce some kind of a solution. And as pacifists, and as a pacifist religious tradition, we also don't have a way to enforce, to force people to sit down at a table and talk to each other and come to a reasonable kind of outcome that would stop this current situation. So we're so constrained in what our options are. And then it becomes very easy to say, well, maybe what the option is to actually, that one side who we may feel more sympathy towards should perhaps be armed to the teeth, so that so that they can defend themselves. And I absolutely respect people who feel that that is a priority. At the same time, from a pacifist, nonviolent position or perspective, I also see and recognize the layers of damage and pain and trauma that may result in some military victories, but are going to require a deep commitment to repair. And I'm not saying that that Bayard Rustin would have had a solution to the Ukraine crisis, but I'm pretty sure that Bayard Rustin would have pushed us to keep trying to find nonviolent responses to a situation that at the moment is being dealt with primarily through military force. And ultimately, in the end, there will have to be, I mean, even in the end, if one side or the other claims victory, there will have to be a moment where the damage and pain that is produced as a result of this current military conflict, it will have to be addressed in one way or another. So, and I guess that means that also the other part of it is being in it for the long haul. And that was certainly something that Bayard Rustin demonstrated in his work. So this will be something that we will need to be able to engage on as we do with many other conflicts around the world that are also really pressing, and we'll need to be able to do that over the long haul. So.
Sarah, thank you so much for calling us into this work for the long haul, for putting us in conversation with people who we've learned from in the past, and offering your words to the people who will learn from you in the future. Before we close, we want to take a moment to thank our friends on Zoom. We're going to take a picture of you. So we invite you, if you want to be in the picture, to put your image on. And if you don't want to be in the picture, to close your video. And there will be a few screenshots taken to invite you into the room. And while that's happening, for the people who are here on campus, to think about all the people who are not physically present with us, who we're learning from, we're learning with tonight, all the conversations that have happened in this room over time, and the ones that will happen as we stay in this work for the long haul. And I'll invite all of us into silent worship to close. Sarah, thank you again. And thank you everyone for joining us in this conversation.